Weird West is coming out in a couple weeks, and I've been able to play a ton of it for review, but I thought an impression slash preview would be an awesome idea. With so many good games coming out, it might be hard to track all of them, and Weird West is well worth tracking. Westerns and magic. If you've followed the channel, you know that I have a soft spot for that particular mixture. There's almost nothing as cool as skinning some smoke wagons and sending some dude to his grave while fighting off supernatural creatures. And that's what you get to do here. After you watch this video, or even prior to, check out the Reddit or the Patreon and the Discord if you want to talk more about this game. Now, if you've played the board game Brimstone or the RPG Deadlands, and if you haven't, I would suggest you do, then you already have an idea of what you're going to be lucky enough to experience with this game. There was also Hard West, which came out a couple years ago. Coming into this genre is Weird West, the creators of Arcane Studios and the minds behind Arx Fatalis, Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, and a little game series called Dishonored are the ones who make this. One pattern you can measure across all those games is their flexibility in combat and their fixation on allowing for moral quandaries to rise up at any time. Weird West is the same way right from the start. And at the very beginning, it follows the main character and later on characters on her mission to find the kidnapped husband that's disappeared, putting back on their weapons and instruments of her prior trade as a bounty hunter and moving through the game world, hiring partners who, yes, can die brutally or come back and actually come at you if you make a bad choice, and exploring this large world. The combat itself, when you actually jump into it, is real time. Now, you can slow it down into a bullet time like speed, making careful aim of shots, or a well-placed glass bottle filled with flammable fluids you can bounce off some poor toothless dude's face. You can burn them all down. You control movement with a keyboard, aiming with the mouse, diving behind cover, or leaping out of the way of enemies. And if you slow time down, you can actually time those with attacks from the different enemies to dodge out of the way. But the game's desire is to be fully interactive with those environments. Noticing right from the start, you can kick barrels into enemies, you can toss random items to get their attention or off the side of their face, or you can scare horses to send them running and the enemy chasing after them, opening up a spot for you. And speaking of the enemies, at least right now, they're a true highlight. The first thing you notice, regardless of what difficulty you choose, is that the enemy's patterns for movement are a great deal larger and longer and more complex than you normally see in these kind of games, with them meandering around a wagon, checking paperwork, walking into homes and through them. If you unlock a door, they may change the entire way in which they patrol, making that shortcut through the door something that you can use against them and changing the way in which they move. One of the first things I did was I snuck around a base and I ended up watching wolves cut down one of the guards as I got near to them. I ran off, leaving them to die, and saw some of the other guards run to fight them. When I snuck in, their patterns had slightly changed, and what I thought was a safe place turned out to be the world's biggest dunking contest with my head as the rim. Reloaded that and started again. There are few games that offer true choice that are reflected in a tangible result that isn't easily identified as scripted series of logic gates that start to look artificial over time. So far, Weird West has a much more natural progression of choices with a grayness to their results that I really like. I ended up finding somebody in a basement and saving him, and he became a lifelong friend, a character who could come out later and help me during a battle. Situations like that have already popped up multiple times in the game. Graphically, it's got a unique, darker, grittier look than I think we've seen before. I guess you could say it's built on Dishonored, but it's a 3/4 view this time with an adjustable camera that can almost go top down. It has an outlined kind of dark art style to it, with heavy splashes of color and pomp and circumstance that pop up that actually feels a bit like a Sunday matinee Western of all things. Moving on to the story bits, the main story beats themselves, those are planned, but a great deal of the secondary stories, the notes, the quests, and even the battle locations are mixed differently each time you start the game. As you work through the game and you touch on different factions and begin to unlock more of the story, the shifting it does due to your choices is almost instantly felt. So much so that the first bit of information you actually are given when the game starts, and hammers this home a couple times, is that no one is safe. Not you, not your family, not any NPC. So if you want to walk into a town and blow every single character away, you can. If you want to hire a posse to go with you, you can do that. They can die. You can go it alone. The actions of the player are tracked though. So stealing horses, shooting the innocent, and other choices can get you locked up. It can drive your companions to actually leave your party and, yes, come hunting for you. And even here for this impression, you definitely get the reflection of these developers and what they've done in the past sort of melting back into this. You also see what I consider to be a great deal of motivation to make it feel a little bit like a D&D game, and it definitely does. And of course, that would have to be reflected by a large variety in the weapons. You can upgrade them, you can break them down in the field for parts, and better yet, you can learn a number of skills that are both supernatural and otherwise to take on the enemies by collecting little tiny animal parts. I'll talk about that later in the actual review itself. Now, even in the first locations, I found myself moving backwards through a map, stealing away into the center of the map, finding a hidden shaft, and then taking out enemies from the inside out, locking a door to a room after finding a key to that door so the enemies couldn't discover the bodies I'd laid out in there. There's a ton of interaction in the world, the adjustments that we see in the way they traffic, the way they move, their pathing, if you do lock that kind of door. And this stuff even extends to the day and night tracker. Now, that's one of the few times where I've always felt that games don't necessarily reflect day and night very well. They usually have one or two changes. Here we see a number of them. Not only do you have missions that are timed, though they're pretty flexible. At night, stores are closed, but you can still figure out ways to get into a bunch of them and steal items. Environmentally, it changes, like being harder to see to enemies during low light environments. Rain can change statuses for your character, as well as enemies and animals. And I'm going to keep this part secret, but there's a lot of different stuff you can do environmentally that completely surprised me here. You can even go out and dig up old graves and find things within the graves. You can bury bodies if you have a shovel so that an enemy can't see them when they come back for a new path. You can hide bodies in bushes. There is a ton of stuff you can do here. And the reason why I think this is so exciting is you can play out these journeys across the map. Each one of the journeys is a different character. You take on the roles of these characters, and all of it tells a much larger tale with the different stories weaving together as you go forward. The actions, the reactions of everybody, the people that you have or haven't killed, that you've helped or haven't helped, and the lifelong friends you may have had. And even at the very starting, you can already see some of this stuff adjusting depending on how somebody plays. With those characters connected to other ones and your choices as each one of them plays out as you move forward, those journeys are all different parts of one much larger saga. And it almost feels a little bit like a Viking saga in that way, with different heroes doing different things and that telling the one major story. I don't want to discuss too much about the actual stories so far, and I'll discuss that during the review, but there are some huge changes to the characters you play. It's nuts. As this is an impressions video, I won't cover too much of the negative that I have, and I don't necessarily have a bunch. I will say that graphically it is a little bit lower than you might be expecting when you see a lot of other games with a great deal of polish, that kind of stuff. Didn't notice any bugs or anything like that, but the interactivity does step that up. Sometimes you'll notice that when your character grabs an item, it just sort of rests in front of you as they sort of put their hands out. It looks a bit weird in the animation. I also like the way that they've played this out, sort of like a map and a D&D game in that way. Whenever you go to a location and you end up fighting or talking or just walking through a town, it's all based on a map. So when you want to leave that area, you have to go to the edge of that area to leave. But as you do so, you see this awesome sort of graphical representation that it's an actual piece of parchment map that you're on. You can also do overworld traveling. This is a lot like a board game, like I said, almost like Brimstone. But not only do you have those random experiences that can pop up, you also have new locations that can be found. And one of the cool things about the game is all bets are off. You can go as far as you want in the title. You can try to do whatever you can do to push even farther, which means going into super hyper dangerous locations, even at the very start, and even as that first starting character. There's all these different places you can go. You can get bounties for enemies that can make you money. You can even help people in the town. And the reason why I keep bringing up board games is not to say that it isn't flexible, as I've described in this entire preview. It is very flexible. It's just so that people sort of get an idea when maybe they want to compare it against a Desperados, where Desperados is sort of a mission-based kind of thing. That's not at all what this is. It is a true RPG in a lot of terms, except for statistics, but you are buying skills and so forth. But it tells this larger tale of all these experiences. And I got to tell you, some of the stuff, well, I can't tell you, but some of the stuff is wicked. Does that mean that I'm going to instantly give it a positive review? No. This is a preview / impression. Things could fall apart, bugs, that kind of stuff. But so far, my impressions of it are highly positive. So anyway, that's it for me. If you want to continue talking about this, check out the Reddit. Jump into the Patreon Discord. It helps out the channel, but it's also a fantastic place to talk about games. Stream them internally inside of the private Discord, or don't do any of that and just sit back and wait for the title that's coming out later. Peace out, everybody. I hope you have an awesome week.